just start recording the session. Let me go back. So a second reminder is about progress checks. Progress checks are not required for Intro to Stats. Intro to Stats is a 90%, 10% course. Last year, as a pilot course, we created a pilot Intro to Stats progress check. And in the spirit and alignment to this year's progress checks that are all multiple choice, we created a 10-question multiple choice assessment for marking period 1. We will do something similar for marking period 2, and we'll make sure we share that information with the number and make sure that all the permissions are set up so you can use those. But just a reminder, there is no official progress check for Intro to Stat. And then a third quick reminder is we really appreciate that teachers are using the resources in the Intro to Stat folder. We're going to be referring to some of those resources in a little bit. But as a reminder, if you are going into those resources, please, please, please make copies of the resources prior to editing them. I was contacted by a couple of teachers who went in to look at items and noticed that the original items in the folders have been edited. So please make sure you're making copies of the resources prior to editing them, prior to using them. So as some folks talked about, this is really an opportunity. We're going to start with collaborating about some of these successes and challenges that have been with marking period 1. I know in just the conversation prior to getting into this, a lot of it has been around engagement, and I fully respect and understand that. And please share that as a challenge, but we really want you to think about some successes as well. And so I'm going to put you all into breakout rooms for 10 minutes to really have that conversation and complete this document that I'll be coming up that you'll be able to see. And on the document, I listed 3 guiding questions. They do not have to be the only questions that you're looking at, but there's some key questions. One of them is about pacing. How is pacing going for students? A second one is a general question. When we created the activities in Commons, many of the data sets we created online Google Forms so that we could potentially collect a larger data set, not just from your students, but maybe even across the entire county. And so I'm curious if schools are using those forms or not. And if you're not using them, why not? Why you aren't using them? And then third, what are some of your biggest challenges that you are facing within your Intro to Stats course? And so I am going to go ahead and place folks into breakout rooms. I'm going to go ahead and open. Myself. So welcome back. I thank you for completing this. I want to open it up just real briefly. seems like projects was a topic of conversation, which honestly is a little slightly surprising just because those are usually where you're getting the real life authentic, but maybe it's the amount of time that people have in class to do them. Gretchen, I see you're nodding your head. Can you share a little bit?
Well, I know last year from the woman who retired, but who taught it last year, and they did most of their projects in class, that these kids were very successful with anything they did in class and very unsuccessful with anything they had to do outside of class. So
Okay.
it's just pulling teeth, getting them to even turn in weekly homework, and certainly a project that requires more than 15 minutes of effort. So
Okay. Anybody else seeing issues with the projects?
So the issue I had with the project, and go figure, I created this one, Jen, was not even the scaffolding that I put in, but the fact that the students actually don't know how to use the computer. The stuff that I really thought, like where I scaffolded for them to figure out, they got. When it came to making a Google slide presentation, that was where the issue was. They can do all of this on their phone, and then when you ask them to put it into a presentation using technology, they cannot do it. Whereas last year they could handwrite it, and I got great presentations for it.
That's interesting to hear. So I do think one of the things that we could consider around the projects, I know towards the end of last spring, we spent a good amount of time on the project. So we spent 2 to 3 weeks and really scaffolded it out and had the engagement. Now, part of that was because it was a cumulative, well, the idea was that we would have a cumulative project for the entire year. And unfortunately, we were going to create that in March or April as a PLC. And of course, we know where we were in March or April. And so with the help of folks like Shayna and Cynthia and others, we created sort of these mini projects at the end of the year. And so that could be something that we could consider, is to think about where to put projects, because maybe having them in their space right now where we only meet 2 days a week isn't the best space for them. But if we have them towards the end of a year or towards the end of the semester or something like that, and having having more space to dedicate it, that might be a good use of it. Anything else that came up? I'm glad to see Stats Medic. We're going to talk about this. Getting students to engage, creating a positive environment. That's great to see. That's something that's happening. So all of this is fantastic to see. Okay. So we're going to jump to talk a little bit about Unit 4 and creating probability in a virtual setting. And one of the first things I want people to remember and realize is these are all resources that you already have for Unit 4. So one of the resources that we have are all of the material from the textbook. So this was stuff that was tied to Sapling that we now is part of the Google Drive, and it is by chapter. And so in some of these cases, you have videos, you have extra lessons, so lots of resources are here. The assessments. And so here we have the formatives, we have the projects, and I know that Shayna helped create a project for Unit 4, even if you have to adapt how it's done, but you have a lot of these resources that are here. The instructional guide is, if I were to click, I'll pull that up. But the instructional guide really gives you lots of detail about each unit. And so that's sort of the main document that you would want to go back to explore the unit. And then Stats Medic. And I'm not sure who referenced Stats Medic, whether it was Shayna or somebody else from that group, but whoever talked about StatsMedic, if you would mind coming off mute and talking about how you use StatsMedic as a tool, or anybody who uses StatsMedic as a tool, that would be fantastic.
I think it was me.
Okay, go ahead, Clayton.
I haven't gotten to chapter 4 yet. I'm finishing up chapter 3 in the next week or so. But I really like it for my students because, as my group talked about, it's really hard to get the students to engage when there's just a random data set. I think Jeffrey's the one that mentioned it. But for my group, I really like at the beginning of class for like 3 or 4 weeks there, I felt like the beginning of class was always, here's the Google Doc, add your data, answer these 2 or 3 questions. And then from there, everybody would make their own copy of it. And that was our active project. We would do breakout rooms and kids would be working on these problems together. And I felt like because they had a personal stake in the data, I thought they were more engaged than some of the lessons where I just gave them data or StatsMedic had given them data for that problem. I thought it was more, and it was also more fun to talk about because we would, we'd make fun of myself personally, generally like, oh, I'm the outlier because I'm 6'3" while everybody else is 5'5" to 5'8", things like that. Like I'm a bad data point. We should kick my data point out and the data would be a lot nicer, things like that, just to make it a little bit more personal. I felt that StatsMedic was really nice for that.
So if you don't know about StatsMedic, you definitely want to sign up. It is a free sign up. These lesson plans, by the way, come from, they have a section under lesson plans that's 180 days of intro to stat. They align to our textbook. As Clayton and others really talked about, they lay out lots of great resources. So if you don't know about StatsMedic, you definitely want to be going to StatsMedic and using it as a tool. So I just quickly put up, and this came from the instructional guide. These are the standards that are in topic 1 and topic 2. And I reference those real quickly just because if you are looking at StatsMedic, if you're looking at other resources and you're thinking about activities, going back to the standards and really thinking about, does this activity align with what is mentioned in the textbook, you can go to the standards and that gives you some sense of alignment. So we've talked a lot about student-focused learning, and I wanted to talk a little bit about some ideas and then turn it over to Cynthia, who's going to share some other ideas as well. One of the things that you can do are Desmos activities. This Desmos activity that I'm sharing with you, it is from the Algebra 2 curriculum, but it's a probability Desmos activity. So it's about chance experiments, and it goes through essentially playing different practice rounds, you're spinning, has you look at chance, look at probability through a spinning game. And so this is the type of activity that you could assign your students either in class or asynchronously, have them engage. One nice thing about having them do it in class is that you're able to see where each student is at and what they're doing. And then you can have conversations about them. So this is an activity that you can use. Another thing that you can try, and this also did come from the Algebra 2 section, and I can create this to share with everybody, is using discussion boards in my MCPS. You know, discussion boards give a really sort of just a neutral way for students to engage in the work. And so if they're not as comfortable engaging on screen, or if they're not as comfortable engaging in breakout rooms, having a discussion board gives them that space to write things down and do different things. So this was a discussion board. Again, it's from the Algebra 2 curriculum, but because it's probability, goes exactly with the topic, where you have 2 spinners. Which spinner would you rather have? You have students explain your answer. And then one of the things that I always usually add is the response up here is, once you post, you want to reply to somebody else. So you sort of get that mathematical discourse happening within a discussion board. And then finally, the thing about StatsMedic is that they're PDFs, and you want to make sure that you are creating these documents as Google Docs. And so I began doing this one. I did not complete it. But one of the things that you can do is literally cut and paste. So this came from lesson 4.3, which are you using Facebook or Twitter? I went to the PDF of StatsMedic. I used my, snippet tool. I cut this, and that's why it's taking a little bit to load. And then I pasted it in. And so essentially you're taking that PDF and turning it into a Google Doc. Of course, you can use Kami to use the PDF directly if students are more comfortable with that, or you can have students engage in Google Docs. So these are just some different tools and some different ways if you're trying to think about engaging your students around probability. And I am going to have Cynthia talk about this activity, and we are actually going to take about 3 minutes as a class to participate. So Cynthia, can you talk a little bit about this activity that you created and what we're going to have our group do here today?
Okay. Well, it's an activity I adapted. I used it last year when I taught this course, so I adapted it to an online version. So first I want to explain. A lot of people are having the difficulty of engaging students. So it's just making sure that your students are actually involved in the process. And part of StatsMedic, the idea behind StatsMedic is EFFL, experience first, formalize later. So making sure that the students actually experience it, get an example, and realize they know most of the stuff that we're learning. They just may not have the vocabulary and the language. So it's like they learn it first, or they see it first, and then they put the words to it. So for this activity, the first link is the actual document, and you can open that up in Kami. And we're probably not go through the whole thing, but I just want to show you everything that's available. Then the second link is a coin flipper. So in class, I gave all of my students a penny, but online, have to be prepared for students don't necessarily have a penny in front of them. So they'll just flip the penny or whatever coin it is 10 times. And on the capture sheet, which is that first link, they'll record their outcomes.
Sorry for all the links back and forth, but I want to
and it does, the kids have this too. Sometimes at the beginning of class, what I'll do is just have them open all links at the beginning and then use them. But the capture sheet that's opening up, they would just be recording in each of the blanks what they got. If it's on their first toss, H or T, second toss, H or T, and so on. And that's kind of the warm up. They can do that while you're taking attendance. Find the fraction of heads. So find the number of heads, the fraction of heads. So they're thinking about, wait, what do you mean by fraction of heads? And, oh, I flipped it 10 times. I got heads 4 times or whatever. Then they'll put the data into the third link that's in the spreadsheet. In the document, which is it's a spreadsheet I made. And if you put your number of heads in the first column, so if everybody puts the number of heads they had total, and you can make up a number if you want to now, just so we can see what it will do.
I was going to say,
how many heads. Ours may not come out correctly, but if you want to put in how many heads that you got.
So as people put in numbers, go ahead and do that.
And try not to skip spaces. So I noticed as people are putting them in, they're skipping spaces. So let's try to fill those in. And I in school, I had the kids come up to the board and put their data into an Excel spreadsheet. All right. So what would happen if you look in the graph on the right? And so what I'm going to do is there's a formula I put in here that's calculating the cumulative proportion of heads. So after everyone had put their data in, what I would do is I would just delete the last few lines of it. And they'll see based on the graph that in the beginning, and we don't have a lot of people here, but when you have a class full of students, you get more data, and they would be able to see that as we added more and more trials to like more and more people's data to the mix, the graph will level off, it'll have less variation, and it will level off at around 0.5. And that gives them the true definition of probability. So it's like they're experiencing it, and then we let them know that's what probability is. It's, you know, the long run of, I guess the proportion of heads that we get in the long run over a lot of trials. And that's kind of the definition we continue to work with. And I just put it, you know, just made the spreadsheet so that it would make the graph as the students put in their data. And that's basically it. And then back to the capture sheet, there's just like a few little follow-up questions that they would answer. So they'll cut and paste. Since we're online, they can take a screenshot and paste it. This would be like their little note sheet, and then answer the question. And that's even something they could break out into breakout rooms and answer, or it could be a full class discussion of what they see. Oh, and I almost forgot. So the last thing is another, you can do similar activities, Staplet. And I noticed last year when I heard about Staplet, I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And I use it all the time in class this year. But Staplet is, it's basically a data analysis application, like the name says, and it also makes the kids make sure they understand what kind of data they are analyzing. And it has a collaborative feature. So if you look at the, towards the top, next to like one quantitative variable single group, if you click collaborative, it will allow the students, the teacher can create a new code. So there's a button that says start a new class code as a teacher. You can create that code, have the students go to staplet.com and put in that code, and you can share data and a graph with the class. So the class can put in the data together. We use this at my school. We used this when we did the activity for, I don't know if anybody did the Gettysburg Address random samples. Yeah, so we used it to collect our data for that and see the different graphs, see what happened when we used a supposedly random sample, the random sample of 5 and the random sample of 10. So we were able to see the graphs real time as the students' data, as the students put their data in. So it made it interactive and made sure that everyone was engaged. And that's all.
Anybody have quick questions for Cynthia? Thank you, Cynthia, for sharing this.
Nice, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
And
it was
so
wonderful.
And so this is something as well to sort of think through with this sheet. And I know I mentioned this before, that I think it would be really interesting if you had a class and then we had multiple classes combine this. And so if you had 30 kids in one class, but then we ended up having 100 or 200, like, does the law of large numbers going to sort of end up helping this? And that's the type of thing where I think having this type of data, and one of the advantages of virtual learning is we can more easily share data together. So that's something to sort of think through. I know that that was one of our goals in creating the Google Docs at the beginning. And I know that some schools have engaged in them, some haven't, but it could really be a really powerful tool. I'm very aware of the time, and I want to really share. I'm not going to have us go into breakout rooms for this, but I want everybody to sort of go to this document. I'm going to close some tabs here. So one of the comments that I've heard from some teachers across the board is the idea of everybody's reinventing the wheel. Everybody's doing this or that. How can we work together and have district-wide collaboration? And as you know, so we as a district, we were able to provide some resources early on for the first 4 weeks or so to get folks started. But now we want to give a space for all teachers to sort of work together as a PLC. And so I created this document and I have put it in, it is in the Unit 4 folder of the Intro to Stats folder. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share it with you all if you want to look at it briefly. So I thought about creating assessments or word banks or question banks, I should add to that. Creating discussion boards, creating activities such as Google Docs, Nearpod. I mean, clearly we could have just put Cynthia's name in there for the activity she just shared. But if if you are interested in supporting and helping and creating something for the upcoming unit, you can go ahead and put your name here and talk about what you would like to do. I think that Cynthia mentioned to me in an earlier call that she's willing to pull together anybody who's interested in just having a voluntary meeting and sort of bringing folks together to work on common resources. I know that in the poll that I sent out to figure out what people wanted to talk about, one of the comments made was, can we create common assessments? And so this could be a tool of creating some common assessments across schools so that everybody isn't creating the same quiz for a unit, but that people can work together. Any questions on this or any thoughts on this about having a space to share ideas and common ideas? I want to really open it up here. Is this something that people think would be useful, or would you rather sort of do your own thing?
I like the idea.
Well, I like the idea also, but mainly because, you know, I'm probably at the back of the pack, only being on chapter 3-6. So I would kind of be living off everybody else. I couldn't like jump forward and do people who are up in chapter 4 already.
And I think that that's so Denise, I appreciate you saying that, and maybe that can be the type of thing that if other people were to do chapter 4, if you have more time to focus on other things because you didn't have to create all these things for chapter 4, then maybe for another chapter 5 or something else.
That's true. That's
You could-
very true. Thank you,
You can
John.
go ahead and do that. So no, I appreciate you sharing that point, but I do see this as sort of a real collaborative piece. Any other thoughts on it? Is it something that people think would be useful? And because my thinking was this would save teachers time in recreating the same things. Jeffrey?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so I'm at Richard Montgomery, and it's me and one other teacher teaching it for the first time at that school this year. So we don't have, I don't know exactly how new the program is, the course is, but we don't have anybody who taught it last year that we can like borrow materials from. And so that's been one of the challenges for us in general, has been sort of finding and keeping up with needing to create assessments, needing to create these things for students. And so certainly from the perspective of kind of having the access to resources that other people either have used last year or are looking at using this year, I think that could be quite useful.
So to jump in, like I've been working with Gretchen, sorry Gretchen to put you out there, but she's created some amazing packets, and in return, like I knowing what to assess from teaching this last year and stuff, especially with more special ed students. So maybe my tests aren't as AP level and they're more intro level and grounded, but you know, I've got some assessments going through Unit 5 and I'm trying to stay ahead. I think the hardest thing for creating like a common stuff is it's easier to find out what people are looking for and what people need. Because like it's easier, I think, to create small PLCs within this big PLC.
So absolutely, I think that that's something that we want to encourage you all to do. Shayna and Gretchen, that's fantastic. You guys have been working together so well already. And the last note I will say is that definitely this is a space where we want everybody to try to contribute as much as possible. We know that, Jeffrey pointed out, he's a second-year teacher in general, brand new teacher to this curriculum. So he might need a little bit more help right now, but then down the line, everybody being able to contribute. This is completely voluntary. Let's be clear on that. If people,
I'm going to jump in. Hi,
go ahead.
everyone. I'm Christina Putman, the acting secondary math supervisor. And what I was going to say is if you can get this organized, and then I can work on getting you stipend pay to come together. But I need this organized first, and it decided which small subsets of PLCs are going to work on what, and we can try to pull us together. November's hard because Thanksgiving is fast approaching, but I would really like to see if we could pull us back together in November before we go into December. So if you update this and we get it organized, John can propose when we could do this, and I'll work on funding.
Great, thank you so much, Christina, for that. I'm well aware of our time, so I just want to say thank you all so much. We do have a short exit survey that I would really appreciate you all completing. Any other final thoughts or questions from the group? Because I know it's getting late.
No, thank you
Just
for letting me in.
I'm sorry.
Of course.
And anybody who needs the materials, I mean, this is my first year teaching this as well, and I'm way ahead. So if anybody needs anything and wants to share, just email me. I'm willing to share. I know it's very, very hard to pull all this material together because I just did it, but please just email me if you have any questions or if you need materials.
Awesome, thank you. That's so generous, Gretchen.
And as you're completing the survey, I'd like to chime in one more time, if you don't mind. John and I created a Google form that's going to be coming out to your RTs and most likely you, but we only need one designee per school to complete it. So when you get it, just decide who's going to respond to the survey from your school. And the survey is in reference to supporting instructional materials of this new course because SAM is going to be sunset next year. So Intro to Statistics is going to be the course that replaces it. And, the other statistics course outside of AP Statistics that's going to be available to our students. So I have to put together a budget and what I would like to do is to request, and again, a budget means that it has to be approved and this is not guaranteed, but I'm putting together a request to see if we can purchase additional classroom sets of textbooks for you for the following year, when hopefully we'll be back in school buildings to help support the implementation of the new course. Ideally, I would love to have the ebook available as an option. Unfortunately, the data sharing agreement still has not been worked out. There's strict regulations MCPS provides to protect students as well as teacher personal information and academic information. And we're not there with that company. And so the best backup that I have is the printed material, the textbook. And so that survey will be coming for shortly. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. And again, it's no guarantee, but it's definitely advocacy that I'm doing on behalf of supporting this new course.
Thank you, Christina, for that. And yeah, that survey and that email will be going out tomorrow, including the the slides and the partial recording. My apologies that I did not get the warm up, but it will include the recording as well. So I know that it's late. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to come after a long day and participate in this. I'm really excited about the potential collaboration of this team, and I hope that you have a wonderful evening.